Happy Monday, everyone.
Happy hot Monday if you're anything like where we are here.
Many places, yes.
Yes.
I wonder how the weather is in Estonia today.
Well, it can't be any hotter than what we've got. We're close to 110 here in Dallas, so
That's
Well,
crazy.
yeah. And it just goes on and on.
Well, I hope that people are watching this from a nice, cool, air-conditioned place. And I'm Betsy Coe. I'm here with Ashley Robinson, David Randall, and we are here well, David is going to tell you all about the latest stop on the 15 Nation tour.
Yeah, we're gonna wrap up Estonia, and tell you about the next stop on our tour. It's hard to believe, but we are already headed into stop number 11 on our tour. We came from a place, what is it, seven months ago, that we weren't even sure if this was going to take off, and sure has. It's been a really fascinating journey for those of us that have, some of us that have been with it from the beginning, and those that kind of jump in and out. Um, and we've got just 4 more countries to go, and then we'll have our big wrap up, and then our big announcement as to what comes after the 15 Nations tour. So that's still to be. It's a secret that only about probably 5 or 6 people are fully aware of. Okay, so Estonia. Estonia has been it's been a pretty successful trip for us. The There's a lot of similarities between Estonia and Ukraine in its history, being that they're both former Soviet states, and that creates some difficulties because Soviet records were very secretive, not not the most open country when it came to records. But unlike Ukraine, um, I think Estonia has kept a very strong sense of independence and much more nationalistic feeling than perhaps the Ukrainians did. The Ukrainians kept that. Um, they had a nationalistic feel to being Ukrainian, but they also, a lot of them saw themselves as Russian, or as not as Russian but as Soviet, and so there was a lot of mixing of the culture. Where Estonians, from just my limited experience here, seems to be they kept a strong sense of independence all along. I don't think they were real happy about being included as part of the Soviet Union. They were very reluctant to that, which works to our advantage because again they kind of kept their own records, and they didn't do as much migrating. So the family stayed intact. Where a lot of the Ukrainians moved to the Soviet Union, they moved to Russia. Um, the Estonians don't seem to have done that as much. So there was much more cohesiveness in the culture and the people. So that made it a little bit easier. Um, and one of the things that I'm finding as we go through the various countries, there are some real gems of information out there that unfortunately in 3 weeks we don't have time to fully uncover and explore. Um, but we did find some Estonian archives online that are independent of, say, the standard ancestry family search, but actually records from Estonia that are there and available. The problem is that they're mostly in Russian, and so you got to kind of figure out how the website works and all of that. But if we have the time, and at some point maybe we will or somebody will, you kind of start to learn the patterns. I know with my own family, I've got Swedish ancestors. I don't speak Swedish, but I can read the records fairly well because I know what the word for birth and death and marriage and those key terms are. So at some point, if someone has time that's interested in Estonia or any of the other Russian speaking languages, a lot of that information is there. We found that also in Argentina. There's a whole a ton of records for Argentina available in Argentina. If you speak Spanish or you know someone that does, they're available. India, we didn't find them in India, but we found a lot of their archives in in London because it used to be a British colony. So the information's out there, and as part of our phase two, as I mentioned, what's coming after the 50 Nations tour, hopefully we'll have time to go back and scout these out. By the time we discover these, we're already 2 weeks into the journey.
Mhm.
So we've only got about a week to start to figure it out. And if you go over to our Discord channel, you'll see right now there's a whole bunch of dialogue on records that we just uncovered within the last 24 or 48 hours. We just haven't had time to sort them all out. Another interesting source, it's a little frustrating, and I don't know if they pronounce it Genie or Jenny, but GENI.com.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And they have an amazing number of records or family trees, I should say, not records, but family trees for many of the notables that we've included, including a lot of our Estonian. We found it with Panama, with Argentina. The
Mm,
family trees of these people are there. The problem with, I'll call it genie.com, but the problem with their site is they don't require sources or
mm,
citations. So
mm,
you can tell that people have done a great deal of work because you'll
mhm,
have, brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles and cousins with the birth dates and death dates and places of burial and all that. So somebody's done some great research. We just can't figure out where they got the information from. And there's no way to know how valid it is or not, other than just it looks valid. But that's obviously not enough. So it's a little frustrating. But I didn't do it so much with Estonia, but I have twice been able to contact people who posted on that website and had them give me direct information where they got it. So the people have the sources sometimes.
mhm,
Um, they're just not asked to post it. They can, but they're not asked to, so they don't.
mhm,
So I wish other sites were as strict about that as WikiTree is about making sure that you have the sources to back your information. But that gives us a lot of clues nonetheless. Again, the problem is that we can't, we don't always have, even if you have the birth dates or the names, um, we don't have access to the original records necessarily. So
mm,
that's frustrating when you have a whole family tree and you can't do anything with it because you don't know where the information came from.
yeah.
So anyway, but we did do an amazingly good job this time around with Estonia and making connections. I believe we had of our 15, we had five. Let me double check here. One, two, three, four, five. No, we had six of our 15 notables connected to the tree.
Hey, that's great.
That's over a third, so that's pretty good. Um, and the ones that we didn't connect, every single one of our notables, we were at least able to add some family members to.
Mhm,
We're not always able to do that. Sometimes you can't find anything about certain people. Um, if they're if you can't get at least a parent or somebody, it's really hard to grow the family tree if you can't get those immediate family members. So, but this time around, all 15 families or all 15 notables had their families extended. So that's really good. And as we've talked about before, that means somebody down the road is going to come along and be able to connect, or at least have a better opportunity for connecting their Estonian roots than they did 3 weeks ago. So that's great. So let's take a look just to show people. I see some of our regulars here. I know Darren and Axel and Paul were all very involved this time around. And then I see some names that I don't recognize. So perhaps we have some new people that are, just tuning in. So
Can you
I
zoom
want to
in?
go through,
Yes,
pardon?
I can zoom in. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Um, so I want to go through a couple of our Estonian notables and just kind of show people how we came about making the connections. And we're going to start with Carl Bear.
Okay.
He's, I believe, the second on our list. There he is. Okay. Carl Ernst von Baer, also known as Carl Bear. If you are a scientist or a biologist, you may be familiar with him. He is considered the father of embryology.
Mm,
He studied embryos back in the 1800s, and again, was considered the father of embryology, father of that field of science. So he's quite well known in that field, maybe not so well known if you're not a biologist or an embryologist. He was born in Estonia, which was then part of the Russian Empire. That's different than the Soviet Union. We're talking back when the czars were in charge.
Mm.
And Estonia was part of Russia. Estonia gained some independence at a certain point and then was taken back over by the Soviet Union by force. And so, it's one of those countries that's kind of come and gone. But he was born and died in Estonia. And his father, I wrote it down here just so that I would have the trail. His great great grandfather, who was Estonian, had a brother whose son moved to Sweden. So his great great grandfather's
So I'm looking at
grandson.
the family tree now.
Okay.
Well, I see his mother.
Do you have the father up there? Okay. Why do we not have a father on there?
That's strange.
Can we go to? Well, let me check on mine here because I just looked this up. His
Maybe go to his brother's profile and maybe
I'm sorry. It is through his mother. It's still his great great grandfather.
Because
It's through his
that's
mother's
both
line.
show.
Yes, it is through the mother's line. So it's his. So we would go up to Karl von Wrangel, which would be his great great grandfather.
Okay. Yeah.
Do we have that? Karl von Wrangel. Okay.
Yeah. Should I go to him?
Then, yeah. So if you go to him, so he has a brother, and his brother's name was
Tunis.
Tunis.
Should I go to the brother?
And he has a son, Anton, and a grandson also named Anton Johann Wrangel. And he moved to Sweden.
Wow.
So we have 6 steps in Estonia, and then we moved to Sweden.
There we go, Stockholm. Yes.
Okay.
Wow.
So from him, he had a daughter, Charlotta, who married Olaf Rudolf Cederström.
So his son Anton, his daughter.
Anton's daughter.
Yep. Okay,
Charlotta.
There we go. Charlotta.
Okay.
Yep.
Married Olaf.
Married Olaf.
And then we're going to go 4 generations down.
We're
going to go to Louisa.
It's their daughter, Charlotta. You did the wife. Yeah, there you go. Sure. Charlotta.
Okay.
Katerina.
Okay.
And then we're going to go down. Let's see.
Wife of Olaf. Yes.
His wife of Olaf. Okay. So then we have the daughter. Let's see. Oh, Olaf's sister. So you got Olaf.
Okay, I got
his
Olaf.
sister's Louisa.
I feel like I'm playing. This is fun.
And the point of this is to show how convoluted it gets and how amazing it is that our people are able to figure this out. Louisa is his sister.
Right, Louisa.
Okay. And she had a daughter, Beata.
Beata, yes.
Okay. And Beata had a son named Karl.
Okay.
So here, if we can go to Karl, now here's where it gets a little interesting, our final steps here. Karl had a wife who was born in Philadelphia.
Well, more. That's just an American name.
But we find her in Sweden. If you'll notice, she died in Sweden.
Wow.
Now, I'm not sure what the story is here because we don't have a biography. We just have the documents that show she was born in Philadelphia and she died in Sweden. But nonetheless, because she was born in Philadelphia, we were then able to trace her family.
Sure.
And make the connection to the tree.
Wow.
Very fascinating.
Now how whichever member did this, I'm not sure. How they figured out that connection, I don't know.
Talk about
but this is what I find. Yeah, this is what I find over and over with our members.
Yeah.
Is they keep chipping away until they find something that
talk about falling down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. Now, please do not make me retrace that, go backwards, because I will fail.
Now, again, on this one, I wasn't real involved with, so I don't know the story of how we got from one place to the other, why we went to Sweden.
How they met.
what he's doing in America.
Yeah.
The children were all born in Sweden, so the records come from Sweden, other than the Swedish records show she was born in Philadelphia. And from there, we were able to. You might click on the wife is Ella.
Can I
We
ask
might
one
do her
question?
aunts.
Can I ask a
Are we
question
on,
before
Ella?
I leave?
Go ahead.
What is Kommandor Kappen?
I believe it's a military
Okay.
term.
Yeah, it sounds like
And
command.
I see Commodore and Captain in there.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Huh.
Now, Hal Smith is the profile manager. I don't know Hal Smith, so I'm assuming. And this was created in 2014.
Yeah, same with
So this was one that was already up there,
Mm-hmm.
prior to
Right.
us. But if we click on her, well, do we have Ancestry for her? Yeah, we got ancestors over there, and right, you have a different format than I have, but so
Yeah,
there you see her tree was quite well
right.
Yeah.
well established.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's fun.
but that's the fun, it's, to me, it's like doing the Sunday morning crossword puzzles or any of the other things where you just keep chipping away at it till it suddenly all falls into place. And once you make that connection, um, it's all there. Then I like to go back and figure out not only how did we get there, but why. What's the
Mhm.
Yeah.
story behind? What was he doing? How did a Swedish man who lived and died in Sweden end up marrying a American woman in the 1800s?
I mean,
Yeah.
because if you look at these dates, I mean, well,
She
she's
didn't
in the
live-
Swedish census in 1880 and 1890, but that means we could look for her in the American, certainly the 1850 census in her parents'
Yeah,
household.
1850, probably 60,
Yep. Yep.
and maybe even 70.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Was her father like a diplomat or something? And
And often we find that's often the key is, a lot of famous people, even if they were notable people, even if they weren't in politics themselves,
Yeah.
come from families that were had connections.
mhm.
Mhm.
And so we end up having people who were ambassadors or
Right.
military professionals,
Right. Right.
especially back then, to travel back and forth. That wasn't something peasants were going to be doing,
Mhm.
and it wasn't something that your average person. Um, there were occasions when people moved back and forth, but for the most part, um, people were going to stay once they migrated.
Right.
Um, so anyway, that's Carl Bear, and then we'll take a quick look at a second one,
Sure.
to Constantine Patz,
Okay, here we are.
and he let me go back a couple pages here. So he was a Estonian president. So after the Russian Empire, after Estonia gained its independence from the Russian Empire the
Mhm.
first time around, he was the second president of Estonia, but he was the first president um, of an independent Estonia. So
Mm.
the individual before him was part of was the president under the Russian um, authorities. So this was a bit of a tumultuous time in Estonia, and he was a journalist who eventually became president. And unfortunately, the Soviets came in at the end of his term. Let me see if we've got dates here. I don't know if we've got them. Yeah, he served from 1938 to 1940. So we're talking, um, just prior to World War II.
Mhm.
And the Soviets came in and were not happy with him and wound up arresting him and his son and his daughter, his son and his son's wife.
Mhm.
Um, they were sent to prison. The men were. The wife was sent to Siberia and the Gulag camps out in Siberia. The grandchildren, were placed in an orphanage. There's a sad story of how the younger child died in his sister's arms at the orphanage from starvation.
Oh.
So it was a pretty sad story, and one of those. I guess you'd say the opposite of rags to riches to rags.
Mhm.
A very, very powerful, prominent family that was left really with nothing. The connection we made through him, his brother, he had a few brothers, and they were all prominent in various fields. But he
Mhm.
had a brother who fled the country with
Mhm.
his family. They went to Europe for a while. They lived in a couple different countries in Europe, and eventually moved to Canada.
Mm.
And the story then is from a riches to rags, back to riches again story. Um, their so the brother and his wife and their family moved to Canada, and eventually the grandchildren made their way to the United States. One
Mhm.
of their great grandchildren, his um, name is Stephen Jerviston. He
Mhm.
is a member of the board of directors on Tesla and
Hmm.
SpaceX. He is a multi-billionaire, and his wife, who is his ex-wife, who is
Mhm.
also now a multi-billionaire,
Mhm.
um, her family was American, and we were able to make the connection through her branch of the family.
Mhm.
And they go to South Dakota and then back to the Netherlands. Um,
Hmm.
but
Which
you have
which
to wonder. I'm
which brother was
so
that?
so the brother. Let me get the names here.
Well, if you just go up to jag up
It was
the
Voldemar.
okay. I was gonna say if you just go to
Voldemar
the
Paps.
father and then do the descendant tree, you could see.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would work as well. Voldemar and Johanna, they had a daughter, Sylvia,
Yeah.
and Sylvia had a son named Tonu.
Right. Yeah. I see Sylvia died in Quebec. Yeah. Tonu.
Yes. I'm not sure if Tonu was born before or after they moved to Canada, so we
Mhm.
don't have a place of birth for him.
Mhm.
And then his son is a living notable,
Mm.
Stephen Jurvetson. So he is
Wow.
open. His wife has a WikiTree page, but for people that don't know the policy, unless they have a WikiTree page if they have a WikiTree page, they're considered notable, but they have to have at least two additional languages, so 3 languages total of WikiTree pages in order to be opened
You mean
for viewing.
Wikipedia?
Wikipedia.
Wikipedia.
Oh, I'm sorry, Wikipedia. I'm sorry, I misspoke there.
That's okay.
Yeah, they need to have 3 Wikipedia languages, and she does not, so she's still private. But she does have a Wikipedia page. She's basically famous for being rich. She got a lot of money. I am imagining from her husband from the divorce, and she's a philanthropist. She donates money and contributes to charity, so that's honorable.
Mhm.
But again, her family. But something that always makes me curious when we find these connections. So her family is in South Dakota. And I wonder how many relatives of hers, maybe even on WikiTree, um, know about their South Dakota history, but have no idea they're related to the president of Estonia.
Yeah,
It's not that many steps away,
that's
Right.
but
interesting.
you know, unless you catch that trail, you might even know you got people in Canada, and you might even know they come from Estonia, but you don't know that his brother was actually the president. I find that quite a bit where we get connections.
Mhm.
You know, sometimes we find notables whose parents or aunts and uncles are on WikiTree, and you wonder why somebody stopped without adding the notables unless they just didn't know that
Yeah.
they're that close to that famous person.
That's
Right.
interesting.
So, you know, so it's just funny how often we start in Estonia or Malaysia or um, you know, Egypt, and we end up in South Dakota or Oklahoma or you know, some other place. And I say this to people that are intimidated by you know, by the research. I don't know anything about Estonia or Malaysia or so
Mhm.
on.
Mhm.
Um, we find ourselves very quickly heading to England and France and Germany,
Mhm.
and then often to the United States and South Dakota, Oklahoma, etc.
Because, like you've said
We
before, a
find-
lot of times those
yeah,
notables are related or connected to other notables, and so
exactly.
it's like,
Yeah, I was just working on one today on our next country, and they were they were married to another notable. So when you go to their Wikipedia page, it lists some of their relatives, but then the spouse also has a Wikipedia page where it lists her parents and her father's notable. And you
Mhm.
go to his page and it lists his brother, who's also a notable, and you just kind of just following Wikipedia along. You wind
yeah,
up getting a few dozen relatives there.
Yeah.
Particularly, movie stars marry movie stars, and singers marry singers, and politicians marry politicians. So it's not unusual to find that. We found that in India, if you go to our India page, which was our first country,
Mhm.
we had our 15 original notables. We had 50 relatives or more than 50 with their own Wikipedia pages. So they were
wow,
all intermarried with it, and they usually, um, everybody in the family played the same instrument or, was in somehow the same field. So it's really kind of fascinating there. Um, yeah, we had another one. I think it was Argentina where they were. It might not have been Argentina, but it was they were a family of bullfighters. One was an actress, and she married a bullfighter, and he had a half dozen other famous bullfighters. Now I can't name any famous bullfighters, but if you're into bullfighting, they're all on Wikipedia. So
Well, I mean, look at Johann Sebastian Bach and
mhm,
the number of his children, 20, and you had some very famous composers
hmm,
amongst his sons.
yeah,
well, and they traveled in certain circles, so they
Sure.
married into this the people of the same industry and that. So it's
Mhm.
it's not so hard to understand, but it does make our job a lot easier. Um, and from that, we find online biographies. Um, if the individual, if our notable doesn't have one, their father, their spouse, whoever the other notables are related to, you can go onto Google Books and find old ones. And a trick I mentioned the last time around, if you go to Amazon, you can also often read the first chapter of a biography for free. And
Mhm.
the first chapter is where they mention their parents and their grandparents and
yeah.
all of that. So that's all we need is the first chapter.
And there's
Um,
always
and
Internet
we've done that.
Archive too.
Yes, yeah. So there's sources out there. The information is there. We just have to find it. Um, and then again, a lot of that, we run into in some countries more than others. But I remember in Kenya and some of the others, we could get um, a lot of names, but there were no records that told the birth dates or the death dates. It was just it was presented more in story format. So these are oral histories that are handed down, but we don't have birth certificates and death certificates from Kenya in the 1800s. So that
Right,
that becomes a challenge as well.
right,
So then it's a matter. I know the Native American um, project, runs into this is how much credibility do you give the oral histories? In some cultures, that's considered fact.
hmm,
Um, in American culture, we're told just because your grandmother said it was true doesn't mean it's true. But in a lot of these other countries, if your grandmother said it was true, then it's true.
Right.
So that becomes a challenge too, as to how do we balance um, the oral histories with what American culture and genealogy has dictated as the standard. And there's ways to do that. It's just you just have to be careful where you know that's where we document our sources. We will put down that it's oral history, and people can judge for themselves whether they want to accept that for their own families or not.
Mhm.
Okay, so um, are we ready to move on to our next big adventure?
Yes. Can I give
Yeah.
you a Do you
You
want
want to
to?
do that? Now I'm going to give a little clue. As hot as it is here, I don't know for a fact, but I'm imagining it's probably just as hot over there where we're going next. So be prepared.
Okay, are we ready?
Okay, go ahead.
Yay!
Oh, and okay. Sorry, didn't mean to give you 2 drum rolls, but
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, I was actually wrong. I'm looking up right now. The temperature in Syria right now is 73 degrees. So it's
Oh,
actually,
wow, that's nice.
I'll take that.
So yes, we're going to Syria. We're headed to the Middle East. Um, you know, we visited Egypt previously, which is technically the Middle East, but it's also North Africa, so it's not um, quite the heart of the Middle East. This is our first visit to what they call the Fertile Crescent, the birthplace of civilization. The Syria's history goes way back, but we're only focusing on modern history. I don't go further back with my notables beyond 1800, and usually closer to 1900 or at least 1850. Um, I don't want to get into well, there's a lack of records when you get too far back, but we're not doing ancient pharaohs and people like that.
Mhm.
That's a little beyond our scope. Um, and in fact, WikiTree, I believe, doesn't do BC.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So we're talking, modern Syria, and this was a hard one when it came to the notables, for a different reason than the other ones. Syria has a very depressing history. Person after person that I was reading about just had faced so much tragedy related to civil wars and unrest and religious strife and all of that. Um, and we're not just talking sad stories, but we're talking some pretty horrific stories. Um, and I didn't want to, as I was creating my list, I would find a singer or an actor or politician, and didn't know anything about them, and I'd be reading along, and next thing you know, they're being arrested and tortured,
Mm,
and it was just amazing how person after person, if not the individual, but their family or their ancestors. And I didn't want to, I don't want to avoid that altogether because that is the history. But I
Mhm.
tried really hard not to depress people with 15 horrific stories.
right.
And that wasn't easy. So we got a few on here, but I try to get as much balance as I can. And we also run into the situation that we have with each country is a lot of these nations that were not part of the Western world didn't have pop stars up until recently.
Hmm.
So they've got living notables, but you start going back in time and 1800s, et cetera, they don't have the same movie stars and sports figures and stuff that we had. So that makes it a little more difficult too.
Mhm.
This one is going to be a little bit more top heavy than some of the others with political figures. But I think we got a pretty good balance here.
Well, you got the national poet, you've got singers,
Mhm. Yeah,
philosopher.
we've got some.
It's a good mix.
Yeah,
A film director.
but it was not easy. Yeah.
And that's down to you, David, because I know that you sift through everything and determine.
Yeah, thank you so much for all that hard work you do.
It is
Set
Oh,
all these
I
up.
enjoy it, but it's definitely a challenge. Um, you know, finding, like I said, finding 15 celebrities. The other thing is, trying to find people, and I don't know in advance, as I've said each time we do this.
Mm,
Um, I don't know how easy or difficult these individuals are going to be to connect. Now, I've learned over the time how to kind of get a feel, from Wikipedia, et cetera, on whether they've got some leads. So I think a
mhm,
few of these we're going to have some connections,
mhm,
um, but I really don't know until we get there. We've had individuals that we could not find a single family connection to in the past, not many, but a few. And then we've had others that, we connect on day one. So it's really difficult to know. Now, we'll go down the list here. And our first one, let me get on the right page here. All right. I got off here. Got a little bit of slowness on my computer today, but give me just a moment. Well, the first one here, I've lost my screen. Mariana Marash. One of the things I do try to make a point of is including at least a few female notables. That's, again, not always easy to do because most countries of the world have had male dominated societies, and when you're getting back into the 1800s and early 1900s, particularly in a Muslim country or an Arab country, you're not going to have as many prominent women as you might today in the world. But Mariana was not actually originally on the list. Her brother was. I was having a little trouble pulling his profile together, but it turns out that there were 3 siblings that were all prominent in her family. So I went ahead and chose her, and she actually turns out to be the more prominent of the 3. And she was an early feminist poet. And we have found that in just about every country you have early, from Africa to Middle East to Europe, 1800s women pushing for equal rights, basically. And she lived from 1848 to 1919. Originally part of the Ottoman Empire. That was another issue that came up in picking our notables, is Syria didn't come into being till mid 1900s, although it was in existence as part of the Ottoman Empire. So determining who was considered Syrian and who wasn't, based on their birthplace. All of these people were born in what is today Syria, although it may not have been considered Syria at the time. Syria and Lebanon were also connected as a single entity at one point. So sorting out who was born in which part, became a challenge as well in some cases. So Mariana Marsh is basically a feminist poet. She's the first woman to be published, to have her first Syrian woman to have her poetry published, and she was also believed to be the first woman to write in Arabic, to be published in the newspaper in Arabic.
Wow.
So she was a bit of a trailblazer.
That's awesome.
David, can you talk
Mhm.
about the naming structure?
Okay.
Are these like genealogy within the name?
Yeah, in fact, if we can go to the next individual, I think there's a better example.
Sure.
Now I love it. His first name is just ICC. I like that name. So this is one it's a little complicated, and I think the better, if you go to the lower name, it's a little bit easier to see what I've done here. WikiTree's policy is to put the name in the original language that they would have been in, when the person was living. Sometimes that's hard to do in a country like Syria that has 100 different languages and dialects. You can assume, but it's hard to know sometimes. And then if you don't speak the language, that becomes difficult too. But the bigger problem for me is when we're actually working on the profile. If I write this all in Arabic, nobody's going to be able to find it.
Right.
So what I've done here is I put the Arabic name in the nickname box. It's not a nickname, but it puts it all together there so that it can be read. But it also allows us, while we're working on the project, to know who we're talking about.
Wow, and look at his ID number.
We can't see it.
Oh, sorry. It's all.
Well, if you look in the yellow box,
yeah,
up above, that's his ID is number 1.
This,
Yeah.
of, you know,
Number
basically
one.
that entire thing.
He's number one.
Wow.
That's
Now,
awesome.
yeah. Now, if you look at the where it says on the where it says is IZZ down below, and then it's in Arabic, and then you get to the end of that line, and it's got an AL for Al. That means of.
Of
So he's from Qatar.
Qatar.
of Qatar. Qatar, right?
I don't know if it's the same or not.
Hmm.
I haven't done enough research to determine that.
Hmm.
If you look a bit further where it says IBN,
Hmm.
everything after that is that means son of. So everything after that is his father's name.
Mustafa. And then Mustafa is son of Yusuf,
So
son of
that's likely, yeah. So that's likely. Again, I haven't researched this individual specifically, but it likely does give you the genealogy of
I love that.
this
That's
individual.
neat.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And the challenge is figuring out which box to put all of this in. It's one thing to write it out in a straight line, but when you got to figure out what's the first name and the middle name, and then a lot of times there's titles that are thrown in as if it were their name. So you got to figure that out. Or the title might be the father's title, so it'll say Ibn Sultan Mustafa, and Sultan isn't his name; it's his title, but it's now part of the last name of the first one. And in these cultures, they don't have last names. They just go by the son of so and so. So that's not their last name. We put that in there as the last name, but they really only have a first name, and then go by and sometimes second names, but they don't have last names as we would know them here.
So is that
Now, something I didn't mention back in Estonia, when they became independent, they did something called the Estonianization of names, where they encouraged everybody to change their name to make them more Estonian and not Russian. So I forget exactly when this occurred, probably in the 50s. Everybody just changed their name and just picked a new name. So that
Wow.
makes tracing them kind of difficult as well.
I bet.
But we were finding that it's like, why does his father consistently, why are their fathers all have different last names than they do? And it's because it was a national thing to change your name.
So it
So
seems
yeah, so the naming is going to be it's going to be a challenge, but once we figure it out, it actually will work to our advantage.
Yeah.
You might have a whole bunch of profiles that are all number one.
Every single one.
Yeah.
Well, no, I take that back. I think all but one or maybe two of the 15 are all number one. Yeah. Yeah. And that made my job a lot easier, because usually I have to figure out the numbers and transfer them. But I just put one on everybody. And if it didn't come out, then I went back and changed it. But 13 or 14 of them are all number one. Yeah. And you'll also look at where they were born and died. He was born in the Ottoman Empire, and he died in the British Mandate of Palestine.
Right.
So that that's another thing we have to look at, is where are we going to find the records? What is the British Mandate of Palestine today? Is it what we know as Palestine, which technically isn't necessarily a recognized country everywhere? So where are those records, or is it is it a different Palestine than what we recognize? Ottoman Empire, is that will those records be in Turkey, or are they going to be in Syria, where he was born? When you're getting back in the 1800s, that probably isn't. You're not going to have as many records to begin with, but as we start getting into the 1900s, it's going to tracking down. Because you're very much like Europe, when the the borders change in Europe. The Middle East the boundaries have been redrawn quite a bit. Okay. So we want to continue down the list a bit. We've got back here. Okay, so Shukri al-Kuwatli, also kind of sounds like Kuwait there. He was born in the Ottoman Empire and died in Lebanon. But again, this is when boundaries were changing. So he was the first president of the post-independent Syria. So the first president after Syria became independent.
Mhm.
The next one on the list is Soraya Tarzi. Now, she is a member of the Syrian royal family. They did have a king at one point. I chose to go with her because she's one of the most famous women in Syrian history, but she was actually the wife, the queen consort of the king. But we'll see how easy it is to connect the royal family. You would think that would be easy, but we haven't found that with some of our royal families. They've not been as well documented as you might expect. So
Mhm.
we'll see. But I'm imagining Syria probably will. Um, but her husband was overthrown. She died in exile in Italy.
Mhm.
Whether or not the family continued in Italy, um, if they moved on from Italy to other European countries or to the United States. I'm not sure where the family ended up. So there may be some leads there,
Yeah.
whether or not they had children or um,
To
and so
be
on.
to be
Um,
determined.
we have Gene Carzo. He is an artist and an illustrator. He illustrated books for Ernest Hemingway.
Wow.
And I forget who else we said here. Albert Camus. Um, when they published their books, he was their chief illustrator.
Wow.
You can see we don't have a lot of info here. We're starting with a blank slate, but
Yeah.
now his original last name was Zulumian, but he went by Carzo.
Mhm.
Don't know where the name came from. Zulumian.
Hmm.
Died in France.
Yeah. Huh.
Then we have Adib al-Shishaki. And I don't remember me up here. Oh yeah, so he was a president of Syria. Um, I don't know much about him, but he was a revolutionary who became president of Syria for just a brief time in the 1950s.
Hmm.
Um, he ranks very high. You can actually Google famous Syrians,
Mhm.
and you'll get quite a few lists. And he seemed to come up on just about every list.
Hmm.
I actually have a few web pages also that I use standard that list famous people from around the world. And so I don't know much about him, but his name routinely came up as one of the most prominent Syrians. So I figured
Mhm.
we'll let the members figure it out. And he died in Brazil. A lot of Syrians have moved to Brazil. They have a large
Hmm.
Diaspora.
Syrian population in Brazil. I imagine, you're seeing these people that were born in Syria and died elsewhere. Most of them died in exile.
Mhm.
At some point, they crossed somebody. They took the wrong side in a coup or a battle or whatever, and fled the country. And you'll
Mhm.
see that, as I said, it's a lot of tragedy in these people's stories. Um, but even these that maybe weren't as tragic in terms of the torture and that nonetheless had to leave their homes with their families and give up their what they'd worked hard to achieve. um, and you see them being spread throughout the world. I think we've had France and Lebanon and Brazil and already several different places that we've seen these people leave to.
Mhm.
And then we have Michelle Aflac. Just like the when you Google him, you get a lot of car insurance ads, but it's pronounced the same. Um, and so now he wasn't just a philosopher, but he created something. I don't know if I'm going to be able to pronounce it right, but it is a political theory. Ba'athist. I don't know how to pronounce it with that little
Mhm.
exclamation mark in the middle there, not exclamation mark, but the apostrophe.
Yeah.
Ba'athist. But that is the current political thought in Syria. And Syria right now is going through some really rough times with their own civil war. And
Mhm.
but the theory behind it is basically that a strong leader is going to take over and unite all of the Arab nations. Saddam Hussein was a believer in that theory. The current President Assad is a believer in that theory, but they believe that it is their role to come in strong, and it's a nationalistic theory that we're going to create one great Arab state, but it's going to take a strong dictator to do that. Is basically my understanding of the theory. It's probably a very simplistic explanation of what I've read, but that's the gist of it. So he was a revolutionary, but really is the one that came up with that initial thought. And then we get this singer. So we're getting a little pop culture here.
Mhm.
Her stage name was As Asmahan, and she is a singer. She is one of the most was considered one of the
Recognizable.
top Arab singers of her time.
Mhm.
They said she rivaled one other singer who was an Egyptian singer, um, second only to her. The interesting thing about her is she was killed in a car accident when she
I
was fairly
noticed.
young.
I noticed 30.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and she there's a lot of speculation over to what that car accident was all about.
Mm.
That there was some sort of involvement in espionage, or she was having an affair with some high level person that kind of the Marilyn Monroe, JFK kind of thing.
Mhm.
Whether or not these are just wild conspiracy theories or there's something actually to them. Again, I haven't had enough time to research it. She died in Egypt, so another one that didn't end up dying in her home country. But kind of the stuff legends are made out of.
Mhm.
Whether or not she'd have the same um, um, notoriety had she not died young. I don't know,
Yeah.
but yeah, there's an interesting story to be uncovered there.
Just a note, we have about 7 minutes until we've
Okay,
been on for an hour. So
okay, let's scroll through these fairly quickly. Just
we're having too much fun.
so, yeah. Um, so we have here the national poet of Syria. Now, almost every country that I've searched for notables for, I've come up with the national poets. We don't give poetry as much status here in the United States, I think, as maybe another place in the world, and particularly what you would consider maybe third world countries. Um, I think poetry is a way to get their history written,
Mm.
to get it shared and transferred from generation to generation. So most of these countries have some very well-known poets, um, and most of them have a national poet. This individual passed away in the United Kingdom, so once again, somebody who wound up leaving his home country. So
Mm.
um, the vast majorities of these individuals were finding that. And then we have Nuruddin al Atasi. He was, if I recall, he was was he the president? Let's see if we scroll down here a little bit further. He's another one. He passed away in France. Um, oh, okay. So he was president of Syria, and he was overthrown by the current President Assad, current president, his father was president prior to him, took over in 1970. So the Assads have been in charge of Syria since 1970. When Assad took over, he had the prior president right here arrested. He spent, I believe, 22 years in prison. And then he was flown to France for medical attention when he was dying, and he wound up dying in France. But he spent 22 years after being overthrown in a Syrian prison.
Wow.
And then after him, we've got, we'll just go down the list real quick. We have, Mustafa Akkad. He's a filmmaker, a producer. He wrote or he produced the Halloween franchise.
Oh.
Yeah. And he unfortunately was killed in a terrorist bombing in Jordan.
Wow.
So another tragic end, and another one that didn't die in Syria. And that's important to our research, because it means we're going to be traveling all over the world,
Right.
to find these people.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, certainly.
He went to school. He went to America as a young man, went to school in the United States. So he very well may have quick connections in the United States. Khalid al-Assad is an archaeologist. This is a tragic story. I remember him from the news. He spent 40 years as the head of antiquities for Syria. And when ISIS took over, he hid a lot of the Syrian artifacts. And the ISIS wanted to destroy the artifacts. They want to erase the traditional culture. He hid it. He wouldn't tell them where he hid it. So they drug him out to the town square, and they beheaded him with a sword, hung his body by a lamppost, and left it there to warn people that you don't mess with ISIS. And that was big on the news. That was just in 2015. He was 83 years old. And his whole life was just about running a museum and preserving culture, and for that he lost his life. Those are the sad stories that were just hard to avoid, and it's just person after person. I don't have much to say about Sabah Fakir, other than he was a tenor, singer, prominent in Arabic music. And we've got, our two living people. I'm going to have to open this one up. I didn't realize it was still locked. But this is Syria's astronaut. And the vast majority of our countries, I've found an astronaut. They're usually still living, so we haven't been able to connect them. But I put them up there anyway, because if we can connect them, great. But if we can't, I just like having the astronauts up there.
Eventually,
when I was a kid, astronauts were a big deal. And then finally, I always put the leader of the country up, good or bad, and Bashar al-Assad is the current president of Syria, so he is up there as well. So there's our 15 individuals.
Great job.
It's going to be interesting.
Yes.
And Paul is one of ours that does an amazing job. So I will throw the compliment back at him. But yeah, I wind up often taking a back seat to doing the actual work once I get everything up. And Paul and Darren and a few others are the ones that are doing the work, and they dumbfound me sometimes how they figure this stuff out, but they do.
Great job, everybody.
And we have a good time doing it. And I tell people every time as we close up, don't be intimidated by the topic. If you want to join in, we'll take you by the hand and show you what to do. You don't have to do research. You can pull biographies together, help us format the sources, categorize profiles. There's other things to do. And a lot of times we very quickly end up in the United States or other Western countries. So if you don't know anything about Syrian research, either do any of the rest of us, we figure it out. So come in and learn with the rest of us, and we'll make sure you feel comfortable.
Well, that was fascinating. Thank you. I can't wait for the next wrap up to hear what you've learned.
Yeah, it's always a surprise to me. I have no idea when I when I pick these people where we're going to head. And, you know, I wind up being as surprised on the third week as anybody.
So shall we show the video, the
Oh,
trailer on the way out? Well, as
The-
we go out.
Mhm.
so this is the. Do
I
you
can-
want to do it?
Sure.
So that you pick the right one.
Yeah, and let
Okay.
me say one thing real quickly. Next
Sure.
or 3 weeks from now, we're going to be doing our summer games,
Yeah.
and people that have been with us have noticed our torch traveling from country to country. I don't think it's made it to Syria yet, but it will by tomorrow. And in 3 weeks, we're going to have a really big announcement as to where we're going to be going for the Olympic Games, or not the Olympic Games, the Summer Games. So that'll be our big announcement in 3 weeks.
So stay tuned, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this live cast.
Yes. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.